Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today's Inago Academy webinar on Plan S, a revolution in open access publishing. We will begin the webinar now. So welcome to Inago's webinar. I'll begin by telling you a brief introduction to Inago. Inago is the world's leading language solutions provider, working with over 300 universities across 100 countries around the world. Inago provide language editing and publication support services to assist researchers in achieving success in their research publications. Inago support universities with the publication objectives of expediting manuscript preparation and submission processes, increasing chances of manuscript acceptance for their researchers, supporting libraries with their objectives of providing relevant resources for all research-specific programs at the university, and meeting the information needs of researchers associated at the university. Inago has a suite of tools, services, and guidelines through different methods such as e-learning modules, online portals, question and answer sessions, webinars, and podcasts. So today, we're going to look at Plan S and open access. So we'll begin by looking at some basics of open access publishing and then introduce the Coalition S organization and Plan S. We'll look at the principles, aims, and scope of the initiative and the requirements for open access journals, platforms, and publishers. So let's start looking at the basics of open access publishing for those who are not familiar with the core structure and ethos of open access. So the traditional publishing model is based on publicly funded research, which has been written up, submitted to journals, reviewed by peers, accepted for publication, and published. In the traditional model, authors transfer their copyright to the publishers and retain few rights over that final published version of the paper. Traditionally, articles are published behind paywalls that libraries subscribe to, or the public pays per article to view it on the publisher's website. Even after paying for this access, readers are granted little to no reuse rights beyond the permission to read. You have to apply for special rights to reuse the content of traditionally published articles. So this is a kind of slow development of scientific progress to a limited audience of subscribers, and is perhaps a poor return on the investment of public funds for this research. So this model has persisted for many years until the inception of open access. Now, open access really began in the late 1990s as a global transition from closed subscription journals to a more freely available corpus of academic literature. And it was envisioned at a time when library budgets were reducing and publisher prices were increasing. So a coalition of libraries and librarians under the SPARC coalition got together and decided on a plan to make research freely available for anyone to read at the point of publication, and thus open access was born. So the SPARC coalition defined open access as the free, immediate online availability of research articles, combined with the rights to use these articles fully in the digital environment. So let's compare this open access model to the traditional publishing model we just walked through. The same initial stages, publicly funded research is conducted and written up. The manuscripts are submitted to journals and reviewed by their peers and accepted for publication. But here's where the differences start. Authors retain their copyright and grant the publisher the license to publish under, commonly under a Creative Commons license type. Authors may be required to pay article processing charges to be able to publish as open access papers. The published versions are available from the publisher's website immediately upon publication. And readers and the public are granted various rights to reuse the content of the article under the Creative Commons license. And there are a range of different Creative Commons licenses available that the authors can choose that permit different levels of reuse for the work. And this is designed to accelerate scientific progress, public interest and understanding of research and utility of research, maximizing the return on the public fund investment. There are two main types of open access models. There are plenty more types and colors of open access, but these are the two main ones that you are likely to come across. Gold open access is where the final publisher version, typeset, copy edited version of the article is made freely available on the journal's website at the point of publication. Quite often, APC fees, article processing charges, may apply for the author to pay, and the article becomes open access and freely available without any embargo period. So versions of this that you might see are fully open access journals where every paper in every issue of the journal is open access. There are hybrid journals, which are the traditional subscription journals with an option for authors to choose open access. So that one article is available as open access in an otherwise subscription-based journal. Some journals charge article processing fees, and other journals do not charge any fees. So we'll speak a bit more about that later. The other variants of open access that you'll commonly see is green. And this is where authors are allowed to self-archive their articles, perhaps not the typeset publisher version, the post-accepted and revised version in an institutional subject repository. There are often no fees or charges applicable with green open access, though some publishers may charge for this. And the article can be subject to an embargo period by the publisher. So an author may be allowed to deposit their article in the repository, but it might be after a time of maybe 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, could be 24 months. Variations on the version that authors are able to self-archive can be the preprint, which is the author's copy of the article before it was reviewed, so the version they submit to the journal. And this is called a preprint. Or post-print is the author's copy of the paper after it has been peer reviewed, but before it has been typeset by the publisher. So how can you make your research open access? There is a website, Sherpa Romeo, which indexes open access and archiving options and policies from a wide range of publishers. So this is a good place to go if you want to decide, or if you want to look and filter options by their open access potential. So looking at the two two routes to open access that we just described. Gold open access route is choose to publish in a fully open access journal, pay an article processing charge where it will be available immediately at the point of publication. Or you can go the green open access route, publishing in a subscription-based journal that allows a submission in a repository. You can search opendoor.org for suitable OA repositories and archive it after the agreed embargo with the publisher. So this could be immediate open access of the postprint, or it could be slightly delayed depending on the embargo. Or the final option at the bottom, publishing as immediate open access through a subscription-based journal. So fees. Open access is not always defined as being something to pay for. There are free open access journals, or there are plenty that charge an article processing fee. These tend to be paid after acceptance, but before publication of the paper. The Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, estimated their average article processing charge last year across all of the journals indexed in their database at around just under $1,000. The median and mode averages in 2018 were around $600. And these article processing charges are used to cover the costs for editorial staff and processes, the peer review process, the systems that are used to manage this process, the website to publish the articles, the production services, the copy editing, the typesetting, and customer services, author services, all the support that publishers may offer, and marketing. Fees are usually paid by the authors themselves, maybe funding agencies or grants. The APC could be part of the grant application with some money reserved for the actual publication fee, or they can come from research institutions or universities. So here to illustrate where the money goes from in the publishing industry. Per $100, we're looking at publishers' margins, an amount of management and investment in the editorial and production infrastructure, other publishing costs. So in subscription journals, these can be quite high, which include printing, distribution of physical copies, and of course subscription management as well. These costs are reduced somewhat in online-only subscription journals that don't require printing and distribution. And in open access journals, the sales and subscription processes are simplified somewhat, with the payments for journal operations being paid by the authors themselves. So this further reduces costs somewhat, although there is still a considerable investment by publishers, by platforms, to make the presentation of articles and the quality of website to a high standard. And publishing models. There has been an increase in the amount of open access journals, gold open access journals, and subscription journals offering open access options. So this investigation by Nature, based on data from the Scopus database, illustrates the increase in open access and decrease in subscription-only journals. over the last few years. That was our introduction to what open access is and the concepts. So now we move to looking at Coalition S, who they are, and what Plan S is. So Plan S, the S stands for SHOCK, is an initiative for open access publishing that was launched in September last year, 2018. The plan is supported and developed by Coalition S, who are an international consortium of research funders. The Plan S requires that from January 2020, scientific publications that result from research funded by public grants from a variety of organizations must be published in compliant open access journals or platforms. Plan S was co-authored by Science Europe, an association of nearly 40 European funding agencies and research performers with a combined budget of over $20 billion. So this initiative was born between cooperation of the heads of research organizations, Mark Schultz, the president of Science Europe, and Robert Jan Smits, the open access envoy of the European Commission. And it also drew on significant input from the Scientific Council of the European Research Commission. So what is Coalition S? Their mission is an initiative to make full and immediate open access to research publications a reality. Plan S was initiated by the Open Access Envoy of the European Commission and developed by the President of Science Europe. It's built around Plan S mandate, comprises 14 national research funding organizations and 4 charitable foundations from 15 countries, supported by the European Commission and the European Research Council. So Robert Jan Smits is one of the founders of Coalition S and Plan S, and he recently ended his term and has been taken over by Robert Kiley of the Wellcome Trust, who is now the interim coordinator of Coalition S. Some of the national research funders that support Plan S, the European Research Council, of course, the Academy of Finland, National Science Centre, Poland, the Slovenian Research Agency, and others. Foundations that support it, the Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The main principle of Coalition S is for scientific publications that result from research funded by public grants provided by participating national and European research councils and funding bodies. They must be published in compliant open access journals or on compliant open access platforms. So this is the one target of Plan S, and it consists of 10 underlying principles. So only results that can be discussed, challenged, and where appropriate, tested and reproduced by others qualify as scientific. Science as an institution of organized criticism can only really function properly if the results are made openly available to the community, so they can be submitted to the test and scrutiny of other researchers and verified accordingly. So new research builds on established results from previous research. This is the chain of scientific progress, where new scientific discoveries are built on previously established results. But this can only really work optimally if all the research results are made openly available to the scientific community. Publication behind paywalls withholds a substantial amount of research results from the wider society. The goal of Plan S is to not limit it to only those that can afford subscriptions or have the subscriptions available. There's no longer any real justification for the subscription-based model of scientific publishing, including hybrid variants. Monetizing the access to research results is against the ethos of science. And in the 21st century, scientific publishers should be providing a service that helps researchers disseminate their results as freely and widely as possible. They may be paid a fair value and compensation for the services that they are providing, but no science should be locked behind paywalls. So these are the core concepts that underscore the mission of Coalition S and Plan S principles. So let's look in detail at those 10 principles of Plan S. 1. Authors must retain copyright of their publication with no restrictions. All articles should be published under open access license, ideally the Creative Commons Attributions license, which you might see on open access papers. CC BY is the license of choice of Coalition S. 2. Funders require services provided by compliant, high-quality, open access journals and platforms. 3. To provide incentives to establish open access journals and platforms and support them where appropriate. 4th principle. Open access publication fees will be covered by the funders or universities, not by individual researchers, so as part of the grants. 5, when open access fees are applied, they will be standardized and capped across Europe. 6, funders will ask universities, research organizations and libraries to align their policies and strategies to ensure consistent transparency across the whole publishing system. 7, timelines for open access articles, monographs and books may be longer than the 1st of January 2020 when Plan S comes into effect. 8th principle. Open archives and repositories will play an important role in the long-term archiving of papers and research and its potential for editorial innovation. 9. The hybrid model of publishing is not compliant with the vision of Coalition S and the Plan S principles. And 10. That funders will monitor compliance and sanction non-compliance. So the aim and scope of Plan S is for full and immediate open access to publications from publicly funded research. The coalition of research funders that have committed to implement Plan S, known as Coalition S, call for a definitive shift toward new models of academic publishing, to promote a culture for young scholars with opportunities to excel, flourish, and advance their careers. Coalition S is not biased towards any specific business model or any particular route for open access. The goal is simply to provide free, accessible research to everyone, which is leading to quite a lot of discussion and debate among scholarly publishers about which business models to use, how to adapt publishing models and strategies to meet the requirements of Plan S. The Coalition S also strongly encourage research data, preprints, and other research outputs to be made openly accessible and subject to legal and ethical considerations. Coalition S is also a supporter of DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, that states that research should be assessed on its own merits rather than the basis of metrics such as the impact factor and the venue in which the research is published. The requirements for open access journals and platforms as decreed by Coalition S. So to comply with these requirements, all scholarly articles that result from research funded by members of Coalition S must be openly available immediately upon publication with no embargo period. They must be permanently accessible under an open license, allowing for reuse for any purpose, subject to prior attribution of authorships. This is why Coalition S recommends the Creative Commons CC BY attribution license for all scholarly articles. Publishing in hybrid journals during the transition period under transformative agreements is possible, and again a matter of debates amongst publishers and the Coalition S organisers in how to best achieve a transition from subscription-based publishing to full open access publishing. In addition to this, deposition of research outputs in open repositories is also encouraged to ensure long-term archiving. Transparency on publication costs and fees is also included as one of the criteria that define Plan S compliance as well. So Plan S, Coalition S funders will contribute to establishing fair and reasonable article processing charge where applicable, including waiver policies to ensure that costs reflect quality assurance, editing, publishing processes, and determine and underline how those parts of the publication process add value to the published papers. There is not as yet any firm details or confirmation of what the APC price cap, funding price cap, or what these amounts of publishing fees will be defined as. So we wait to hear on that quite key detail. Coalition S will be conducting an independent study on publication costs and fees to look at article processing charges to establish what these fees should be and what the finances around publishing should ideally look like. So they'll provide financial support for open access publishing through the prescribed routes to compliance. Grants can be used for financing article processing charges in subscription journals under the transformative agreements. The Coalition S intends to support mechanisms for establishing open access journals, platforms, and infrastructure where necessary to help publishers provide the route to open access articles as much as possible. They do acknowledge the importance of a diversity of models and the potential for there to be more than one form of open access in both fee-based and non-fee-based platforms. Coalition S will be commissioning an analysis of journals and platforms to identify fields and disciplines where there is a need to increase the share of open access journals and platforms, particularly between the gap between STEM, hard science, technical engineering, medical research, and humanities, social sciences, and arts, where funding models are considerably different. The publishing sort of behavior and the use of research is considerably different. So there is certainly no one size fits all resolution to responding to these paths to compliance. The Coalition S will also provide incentives for establishing open access journals and platforms and converting existing subscription hybrid journals to full open access. So how long will this potentially take? The timeline for implementation of Plan S will vary among member organisations. It will come into force, so to speak, from the 1st of January 2020, and it will impact on existing grants that are in place, existing publishing models that are in place, new projects and grants, or at the latest, new calls and submissions for projects and grants. In 2023, Coalition S will initiate a formal review process to examine the effects of Plan S. The main focus of this review will be examining the effect of the transformative agreements, as well as options of providing immediate open access to subscription content through open repositories, archiving, and achieving transition to full and immediate open access. So I mentioned transformative agreements a couple of times so far. So we're going to have a look at the details of what these involve. So Coalition S to recognise the models that avoid non-transparent and non-fair pricing, such as offsetting, read and publish models, are a way to achieve compliance through this transition period. They will require that the details of such agreements are listed on a website to ensure transparency and to develop shared requirements. Coalition S intends to collaborate with the Efficiency and Standards for Article Charges Initiative, ESAC, to ensure registration and dissemination of agreements. And they acknowledge that existing transformative agreements might already be in place. However, from 2020 onwards, new agreements will need to fulfill the following conditions to achieve compliance with Plan S. And the effects of these transformative agreements will be reviewed in 2023. So for hybrid journals and in this transition period, initially Plan S decreed that hybrid journals were not compliant, but the consultation period with publishers and researchers revealed that this might be a bit strict. So instead of an outright ban, the Plan S now say that they will not cover the costs of publishing for authors who choose non-compliant hybrid journals, but the papers in these journals will still be regarded as compliant if an open copy can be posted in a repository in tandem with publication, and that the journal has committed to transition to full compliance with Plan S within 3 years. So this does mean that it's still possible to publish open access articles in any hybrid journal and post those articles online and still be compliant with Plan S. Additionally, Plan S will fund those journals that do intend to become fully open access within 3 years. So some of those reactions that I mentioned during the consultation period after Plan S was announced. So on the 4th of December 2018, 113 institutions from nearly 40 countries and 5 continents signed a statement supporting alignment among the approaches taken by Plan S and others to facilitate a full transition to immediate open access. On the 5th of December, the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology pledged its support for Plan S and equally goals of immediate open access for publicly funded projects. Europe's largest national clinical research funder, National Institute for Health Research, pledged support for Plan S in January this year. And Jordan, Zambia, and India also pledged their support to Plan S last month. The African Research Funder, National Science and Technology Council, also joined the initiative in February, and the African Academy of Science also supports Plan S as well. In terms of publisher feedback, 4 of the 5 big publishers have shared their feedback on Plan S implementation guidance. All 4 offered support and a commitment to find sustainable means of achieving the goals of Plan S and for open access. Many publishers already allow authors to deposit their accepted papers in institutional and open access repositories, either preprints or green open access postprints. Article processing charge waivers and discounts for authors in low-income countries are also offered by most publishers through the Research for Life initiative. So takeaway points as we near the end of this presentation. The goal is for researchers and publishers to make the shift to full open access publishing from 1st of January 2020 onwards. The Plan S mandate still has several inconsistencies to it, which will be addressed by Coalition S in the coming months. There are already some groups of researchers who have voiced contrasting opinions on copyrights, academic freedom, what freedom of choice to publish really means. The funding cap, which I mentioned previously, is quite an important part of the requirements of Plan S. How this will affect collaboration between researchers from Coalition S funders with those working on the same project from outside. But ultimately, the key takeaway point from Plan S is the goal for immediately and freely accessible, available research literature. The goal for that to benefit the overall scientific and public enterprise, enhancing knowledge, promoting innovations in research and publishing. So some questions you might have as an author about Plan S and how this affects your choice of journals. And will it complicate your choice of which journals you will be able to publish your research in? Will your research be reusable for others? If you want to publish in a subscription-based journal, is there any way that you can avail Plan S funding to do so. Will article processing charges increase after Plan S? There's a question of if there is a price cap placed on articles, will journals that charge less currently, will they increase their prices? Will journals that charge more for their open access articles, will they have to reduce their costs, or can those higher prices still conform to Plan S requirements? And as an author, to meet compliance, if you need to deposit your paper in an archive, how do you choose which archive that will be to publish your work in? Hopefully this presentation has covered some answers to those questions.